Can you imagine a completely empty, silent street in the middle of Manhattan? Would you dare to go there to save another person's life? For a paramedic, it isn't a choice. The city that never sleeps had, for once, fallen into a profound, unnatural silence. A thick, oppressive humidity hung in the air, a physical weight that muffled the usual symphony of sirens and distant chatter. For Marcus, a weary veteran paramedic, and Chloe, his rookie partner, it was the kind of dead night that made the mundane seem heavy with foreboding. They were parked on a desolate corner of the Lower East Side, the only light coming from the ambulance's blinking console, painting the world in a sickly blue and red wash. Chloe fidgeted with her gloves, the sterile rubber feeling alien on her clammy hands. "I hate nights like this," she murmured. "The quiet is louder than the noise." Marcus, a man whose face was a roadmap of late shifts and grim sights, just grunted. "It's the city holding its breath. Never trust the quiet." Then the radio crackled to life, shattering the stillness. The dispatcher's voice, a crisp, familiar sound, came through with an edge of unease. "Ambulance 64, we have a code for a jumper. East 4th Street, apartment 5B. Caller ID is blocked. Says they jumped from the 5th floor." The words, "they jumped," hung in the air, an unsettling grammatical twist that felt deliberate. "Did you say they jumped or someone jumped?" Marcus asked, his hand hovering over the mic. A strange, cold prickle ran down his spine. The dispatcher hesitated for a full 3 seconds, a lifetime in a profession measured in heartbeats. The caller was strange. It was just a whisper, a creepy little voice. It just kept saying the 5th floor jump. "Get there quick." The line went dead, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. She'd been on the job for 6 months, and the city's darkness was already starting to feel like a living thing, full of teeth and shadow corners. The quiet, as Marcus had said, was a lie. The drive was unnerving. The traffic, usually a snarl of impatient horns and taxi headlights, was non-existent. They glided through empty avenues, the streetlights humming in a low, mechanical monotone, casting long, distorted shadows of their ambulance onto the concrete. It felt like they were the last 2 people on Earth, driving a ghost ship through a deserted city. As they rounded a corner near Tompkins Square Park, Marcus had to swerve hard. A bright red rubber ball sat perfectly centered in the road. It didn't bounce or roll as they passed, but simply sat there, a vibrant, impossible spot of color in the monochrome landscape. In his rear-view mirror, Chloe saw a faint, childlike figure at the edge of the park, a silhouette that seemed to be watching them. When she blinked, it was gone. They pulled up to the address, a pre-war brownstone, its red brick facade a uniform, forgettable mask in the darkness. The street, a block known for its late-night clamor, was completely deserted. The cold, unnatural wind, smelling of damp stone and something vaguely metallic, whipped around them, rattling the ambulance doors and carried with a faint, sorrowful whine that sounded like a child's forgotten lullaby, a sound that made the hairs on Chloe's arms stand on end. The brownstone itself seemed to sigh as they approached, the decorative ironwork over the windows looking like skeletal hands reaching down. "This is not right," Marcus muttered, his hand on the handle of his jump bag. "It's downtown Manhattan. It should be a zoo." Hayes stepped out, the wind immediately cutting through Chloe's uniform. It was a strange wind, not a breeze, but something that seemed to push against her skin with physical weight, like the breath of a giant. It felt like they were walking through a slow-moving river of air, something thick and viscous. They walked to the building, their flashlights the only beacons in a sea of shadow. Marcus pressed a buzzer for 5B. Nothing. He pressed it again, the button clicking hollowly. Still nothing. The silence was louder than any noise they'd ever heard. As he was about to press a 3rd time, the heavy oak door of the apartment building creaked inward, slowly and without a sound, as if an invisible hand had turned the lock and beckoned them inside. The metal of the knob was freezing to the touch, and when Marcus pushed the door fully open, he noticed there was no lock to be seen on the other side. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and cold. It felt wrong, like the building had been sealed for a decade. The light from their flashlights danced over faded wallpaper and dusty stairs. Marcus led the way, his voice a low rumble. "Stay close, kid, and don't touch anything." They started their ascent, each step on the old wood groaning under their weight, the sound of their boots echoing down the empty hallway. The stairwell felt like a vertical coffin, the darkness in the corners so complete it seemed to absorb light. On the second floor landing, Chloe saw something scribbled on the wall in what looked like faded ink. As she shone her light on it, she realized it wasn't ink at all, but a dark, greasy smudge that smelled faintly of salt and iron. It was a child's drawing of a stick figure with a huge, gaping mouth, falling, her breath hitched in her throat. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "Nothing," she lied, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the grotesque little drawing. She looked up the stairwell and saw a duplicate on the third floor landing and another on the fourth. Each one was identical, and as they went higher, the smudge seemed fresher, the smell more pungent. As they neared the fifth floor, the air changed. The stench hit them first, a thick, coppery reek that clung to the back of their throats and made their stomachs lurch. It was a smell of death, but not the simple, clinical smell they were accustomed to from a traffic accident or a body in the heat. This was something deeper, something ancient and foul, like a forgotten tomb unearthed after a century, a scent that tasted of rotted iron and putrefied flesh. It was the smell of something that had died very slowly in an immense pain. They reached the top of the stairs. The door to apartment 5B was ajar, a sliver of blackness inviting them in. Marcus pushed it open with the toe of his boot. The stench intensified, a suffocating wave that nearly made Chloe gag. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom of the living room, revealing nothing. The room was empty. No furniture, no pictures, no possessions, just peeling paint and the overwhelming scent of decay. A strange, oily stain snaked across the bare wooden floor, a dark, organic shape that ended in a pool of something viscous and black. Marcus's light settled on something in the center of the room. It was a small, faded blue blanket, the kind a child would have. It was neatly folded and placed in the center of the dark stain. A shiver ran through Chloe. The blanket was the only thing in the entire apartment that didn't smell of death. It smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something else, something sweet, like old candy. "Where is he?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring of her blood in her ears. Marcus shook his head, his face pale in the light of his beam. "Maybe he's in the bedroom." And then they heard it, a whisper, not from the wind, but from inside the room. It was a low, sibilant hiss, too quiet to make out the words, but a sound that was somehow filled with a deep, personal malevolence. The whisper seemed to swirl around them, a chorus of voices speaking a language that wasn't meant for human ears, but their minds, somehow, translated as 100 tiny voices speaking their names in a chorus of disdain. Marcus went to the window, peering out. "I don't see a body," he said, his voice strained. "There's nothing down there." "What about the neighbors?" Chloe asked, her eyes darting around the empty room, her mind racing. "There aren't any. The whole floor is vacant. The dispatcher must have been, oh my God." "What?" Chloe asked, her own flashlight beam trembling. Marcus stared down at the street below, his face frozen in horror. A figure was standing directly beneath the window. It was tall and spindly, its body a collection of distorted angles, its limbs impossibly long and thin. Its skin was translucent, like a jellyfish, and he could see the faint outline of veins and something that looked like a shattered skeleton beneath the surface. It looked up at him, a grotesque, stretched-out smile on its face, a mouth with no lips, just a wide, gaping tear in its flesh. Then, slowly, it raised a long, impossibly thin arm and waved. A small, inviting, sickening wave. As it waved, its fingers seemed to bend at impossible angles, clicking and snapping with each motion. Behind it, 2 more figures materialized in the darkness, their movements jerky and inhuman, their mouths also stretched in a silent, terrifying smile. "We have to go," Marcus said, his voice an octave higher, a raw sound of pure terror. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and bolted for the door they had entered through. Chloe right behind him, but the door was no longer ajar. It was closed. He grabbed the handle and twisted, but it wouldn't budge. He threw his shoulder against it once, twice, but it held firm. The heavy oak felt like solid concrete. Chloe, fumbling for her radio, found it cold and silent, the screen blank. She frantically tried to open her jump bag, but the zipper was fused shut, an immovable metal line. The window. Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with terror. She scrambled back to the open window and reached for the glass. The pane, which had been opened just seconds before, was now closed and sealed, as if it had never moved. She pounded on the glass, her fist thudding against the pane, but it didn't even rattle. She tried again, putting her entire weight into it. Nothing. The glass was a solid, unbreakable wall. It wasn't just sealed, it felt impossibly thick, like a solid block of crystal. The whispers began to grow. They weren't a hiss anymore, but a cacophony of voices, each one louder than the last. They were no longer speaking in a foreign tongue, but in their own voices, their own fears, and their own darkest secrets. They heard Marcus's own voice, a low and desperate pleading about a call he'd missed years ago, a child he couldn't save, a child he swore he would never forget. They heard Chloe's voice, a terrified shriek, recounting a private regret she'd never spoken aloud, a memory of a harsh word to her mother just before she died. The whispers screamed now, and the two of them, seeing their own personal monsters, began to scratch, claw, and tear at the unmoving door. Marcus turned to face Chloe, his face contorted in a mask of pure panic. She looked at him and saw not the face of her partner, but something else entirely. In his eyes, she saw her own reflection, but her eyes were black, her teeth were long and sharp, and her mouth was stretched into that same impossible smile she'd seen on the figure below. Her skin looked papery and translucent, her limbs elongated into distorted angles. She looked at him again and saw the same monster reflected in his eyes. He saw the same thing. They were both trapped in a funhouse mirror of their own darkest selves. A blood-curdling scream tore from Chloe's throat. She clawed at the door, her nails scraping against the old wood, the sound a horrifying screech in the rising storm of whispers. Marcus joined her, his fists now pounding on the door, a frantic, animalistic rhythm of desperation. The whispers screamed now, and the two of them, seeing their own personal monsters, began to scratch, claw, and tear at the unmoving door. The wood splintered under their frantic assault, revealing the dark, solid material beneath. It wasn't wood at all, but something black and hard, like polished obsidian. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The next morning, the abandoned ambulance 64 was found parked neatly on a busy downtown street, its red and white lights blinking in the early morning sun, its doors unlocked, its engine still humming. The two paramedics were nowhere to be found. The police report would later mention the bizarre lack of a jumper, the strangely pristine apartment, and the faint, unsettling smell of something unidentifiable. The apartment was completely empty. On the door to apartment 5B, they would find two distinct sets of nail marks, deep gouges in the wood that stopped abruptly as if the hands that made them had simply vanished. They also found a single small, faded blue blanket lying in the center of the room, still smelling faintly of candy, its folds now arranged in a perfect, ominous circle. The child's drawing on the second floor had also been altered. A second stick figure, identical to the first, was now falling right beside it. They never found the two paramedics, and the call was never traced. Paramedics work at the edge between life and death. Do you think you could manage that? Look death in the eye? The quiet, unassuming city of Harmony Creek, usually a peaceful tapestry of suburban hum and distant crickets, was for once holding its breath. A thick, oppressive fog, smelling faintly of damp earth and something metallic, clung to the tree-lined streets and seeped into every cul-de-sac. It was a physical weight, muffling the usual symphony of distant sirens and late-night chatter. For Marcus, a weary veteran paramedic, Chloe, his bright but increasingly jaded rookie partner, and David, their perpetually cynical driver, it was a kind of dead night that made the mundane seem heavy with foreboding. They were parked near the old covered bridge, the only light coming from the ambulance's blinking console painting the swirling mist in a sickly blue and red wash. Chloe fidgeted with her gloves, the sterile rubber feeling alien on her clammy hands. "I hate nights like this," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, lost in the damp silence. The quiet is louder than the noise. It feels watchful, like something's waiting. David, leaning back in the driver's seat, a half-eaten hot dog forgotten in his lap, scoffed. Quiet means less paperwork, kid. Be grateful. Or are you itching for another drunken brawl outside the only bar in town with a broken beer bottle? He gestured vaguely towards the unseen town, a place he'd seen enough of to be thoroughly unimpressed. Just another Tuesday in paradise, right, Marcus? Marcus, a man whose face was a roadmap of late shifts and grim sights, just grunted. It's the town holding its breath. Never trust the quiet. It's usually when something truly ugly decides to crawl out of the shadows. He stared out into the swirling fog, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the reach of their headlights, a profound sense of unease settling in his gut. The silence was so complete. He could almost hear the individual droplets of moisture clinging to the air. Then, the radio crackled to life, a harsh, sudden sound that shattered the stillness like breaking glass. The dispatcher's voice, usually crisp and efficient, came through with an unusual tremor, a slight waver that sent a prickle down Marcus's spine. Ambulance 64, we have a code 2. Elderly female, difficulty breathing. Possible cardiac arrest. 13 Willow Creek Road, Old Town. Caller reports fading fast, very fast. The words, fading fast, very fast, echoed with an unsettling urgency that fell out of place for a routine code 2. It wasn't just a medical update. It was a premonition. A code 2 was routine, a medical emergency without immediate life-threatening danger, usually. But the dispatcher's tone and the caller's ominous phrasing sent a ripple of unease through the ambulance. David sighed, tossing his hot dog wrapper onto the dashboard. All right, let's go fetch Grandma Death. Hope she doesn't make us late for coffee break. He started the engine, the hum of the ambulance a comforting, if temporary, shield against the encroaching silence. The address led them deep into Old Town, a part of Harmony Creek that time seemed to have forgotten. The narrow, fog-choked streets were lined with ancient, gnarled oak trees whose branches, stripped bare by winter, clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The old-fashioned streetlights cast halos of sickly yellow light that barely pierced the thick mist, creating long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with every gust of wind. 13 Willow Creek Road was a decrepit farmhouse, its weatherwood siding stained with decades of neglect, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The windows, dark and vacant like blind eyes, seemed to stare out into the oppressive night, reflecting nothing but the swirling fog. A single, flickering porch light cast grotesque shadows that danced like specters, making the overgrown rose bushes by the porch seem to writhe, their thorns like tiny, grasping claws. The air here was even heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth decay, and something else, something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot, but with an underlying metallic tang that made Chloe's stomach churn, a taste of old blood and forgotten things. Looks like something out of a horror movie, Chloe whispered, her hand instinctively going to the small crucifix she wore under her uniform. The fog swirled around their ankles, feeling like icy fingers reaching for them. Marcus nodded, his powerful flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom, illuminating cobwebs that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural, almost phosphorescent light. Stay sharp. Old houses like this, they hold their secrets. And sometimes they don't like visitors. Don't split up. They found the front door ajar, a sliver of darkness, inviting them into the oppressive heat within. The air inside was stagnant, thick with dust and the cloying scent of mothballs and stale medication. It was a smell that spoke of lives lived and forgotten, of dust motes dancing in sunbeams that never reached these dark corners, but also of something else, something deeply wrong. The house was a labyrinth of shadows, each step on the creaking floorboards echoing through the silence like gunshots. As they passed a hallway mirror, Chloe caught a glimpse of their reflection, distorted and elongated, their figures seeming to stretch and thin in the warped glass. She blinked, and the distortion was gone, but the unsettling image lingered. They navigated through a cluttered living room, past furniture draped in white sheets that looked like shrouded corpses, their forms indistinct and unsettling, each one a silent sentinel. The silence was so profound that Chloe could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. They reached a dimly lit bedroom at the back of the house. There, on a bed piled high with yellow blankets, lay an old woman. Her skin was like parchment, stretched taut over sharp bones, her eyes sunken and milky, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one a struggle, a desperate battle for air, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Her hair, thin and white, was spread out on the pillow like a halo of cobwebs, catching the meager light, and seemed to pulsate faintly. She looked ancient, impossibly old, as if she had lived through centuries of suffering. Her face etched with lines that seemed to tell stories of unimaginable pain and a grim, knowing acceptance. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle as he knelt beside the bed. He checked her pulse, a faint, thready flutter beneath his fingertips, barely there, like a dying bird's wings. The old woman's lips parted, a dry, rasping sound escaping. Her eyes, clouded with age, seemed to fix on Chloe, a sudden, unnerving clarity in their depths. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a smile of profound, ancient satisfaction. They wait," she rasped, her voice like crumbling leaves, dry and brittle. "For the ride, the last ride. And you brought them. It is time." A shiver ran down Chloe's spine, colder than the fog outside. The woman's gaze seemed to pierce right through her, holding a knowledge that was deeply unsettling, a premonition of doom that felt personal. They worked quickly, hooking her up to oxygen, checking her vitals. Her blood pressure was plummeting, her heart rate erratic, a frantic drum against the silence, a rhythm that seemed to accelerate even as her life ebbed. "We need to get her to Harmony Creek, General, now." Marcus barked, his voice cutting through the heavy air, a desperate plea against the inevitable, against the feeling that they were already too late. Carefully, they transferred her to the gurney, her frail body feeling lighter than it should, as if it were already shedding its earthly weight, becoming something less than human. As they wheeled her out, Chloe noticed something glinting on the bedside table, a small, tarnished silver locket, almost swallowed by the dust. She hesitated, then picked it up. It was cold, unnaturally so, and when she opened it, she saw no pictures, only a single, dry black rose petal, brittle and ancient, as she held it. The scent of decay intensified, and she felt a faint, chilling whisper against her ear, too indistinct to understand, but filled with profound malice. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she quickly dropped it back onto the table, a sudden urge to flee overwhelming her. Back in the ambulance, the sirens wailed to life, a desperate cry cutting through the silent town, their only connection to the living world. David floored the accelerator, the ambulance lurching forward. Marcus and Chloe were in the back, monitoring the old woman. Her breathing grew shallower, her skin taking on a waxy pallor, like aged porcelain, almost translucent in the dim light. Her eyes, still open, seemed to follow their movements, even as her life faded. "She's crashing," Marcus yelled, grabbing the defibrillator, his hands moving on instinct, charged to 200. They shocked her once, twice, 3 times. Her body convulsed, a final, violent spasm that seemed to lift her entirely off the gurney, but her eyes remained fixed, unblinking, on the ceiling of the ambulance. With a final, rattling gasp, her chest fell still. The monitor flatlined, a long, mournful beat filling confined space, a death knell. "Time of death, 217, Marcus announced, his voice heavy, the words feeling hollow in the sudden quiet. He reached over and turned off the oxygen, then the monitor. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant wail of their own siren, a sound that now seemed to mock them, a lament for what was to come. David, hearing the flat line, cut the sirens. The sudden quiet was jarring, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of moments before. The ambulance continued to speed to the empty streets, the only sound hum of the engine and the soft rumble of the tires on the asphalt, a relentless, growing drone. Marcus pulled the sheet over the old woman's face, but as he did, he felt a faint, cold pressure on his hand, as if she were gently squeezing it. He recoiled, but the sensation was gone. Then, without warning, all the power in the ambulance died. The interior lights flickered once, then plunged them into absolute darkness. The dashboard lights in the front cabin vanished. The radio went silent, a dead piece of plastic. The faint glow of the GPS screen winked out, but the ambulance didn't stop. It continued to surge forward, the engine's hum now the only sound, growing steadily louder, faster, a monstrous roar that filled a confined space, vibrating through the floorboards. "David? What the hell was that?" Marcus yelled, fumbling for his flashlight, his voice tight with alarm, his heart pounding in his ears. No response, only the accelerating roar of the engine. "David!" Chloe shrieked, her voice laced with raw panic, a thin, desperate sound. "The lights are out, and we're still moving. What's happening?" The ambulance sped up, the rumble of the tires becoming a deafening roar. They were thrown against the walls of the compartment as it took a sharp, unannounced turn, then another and another, a dizzying, disorienting series of maneuvers that pressed them into the gurney, then slammed them against the sidewall. Outside, the world was a blur of impenetrable black, the streetlights and buildings dissolving into streaks of nothingness. They couldn't see anything, not even a faint glow of the town. It was as if they had driven into a void, a place beyond light and sound, beyond reality. The air grew thick with metallic tang like blood, and the sickly sweet smell of decay intensified, now mixed with the acrid scent of ozone. "David, answer me." Marcus yelled again, his voice cracking, desperate, a plea into the void. He tried the intercom to the front cabin, but it was dead. He pounded on the partition wall with his fist, a frantic, futile effort, his knuckles raw against the unyielding surface. Nothing. Chloe, her hands trembling uncontrollably, tried to open the small sliding window that connected the back compartment to the driver's cabin. It was stiff, as if rusted shut, resisting her every effort. She gritted her teeth, braced herself against the lurching of the ambulance, and with a desperate surge of adrenaline, forced it open with a loud, tearing screech of metal, the sound echoing ominously in the darkness, a sound of tearing flesh. Her flashlight beam, a shaky spear of light, cut into the driver's cabin. David was slumped forward over the steering wheel, his head resting against the dashboard. His skin was a sickly gray, almost translucent, stretched taut over his skull. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring straight ahead into the blackness, but they were no longer David's eyes. They were sunken, black pits, reflecting the faint beam of her light like polished obsidian. His uniform, usually crisp, was stained and torn, and his usually neatly combed hair was matted and sparse, revealing patches of pale, withered scalp covered in a fine layer of what looked like dust, but shimmered faintly. His hands, still gripping the wheel, were skeletal, the flesh shriveled and black, like old leather, the fingernails impossibly long and curved. He looked like he had been dead for weeks, not minutes, his body a mere husk. The ambulance was driving itself, his dead hands merely resting on the wheel as if in a macabre pantomime, his jaw slack, a faint, unsettling smile on his decaying lips, a smile that seemed to stretch wider than his face should allow. A choked gasp escaped Chloe's lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. "Marcus, David, She couldn't finish the sentence. Her voice was a ragged whisper, barely audible over the roaring of the engine, a sound swallowed by the vastness of their terror. Marcus, seeing the terror in her eyes, pushed past her, peering through the small opening. His own flashlight beam illuminated the ghastly scene. David's corpse, decayed and ancient, yet still somehow gripping the wheel, driving them into the abyss. The sight was impossible, a nightmare made real, a violation of every law of nature, a vision of pure, unholy corruption. "He's dead," Marcus said, his voice flat with disbelief, a hollow echo in the roaring darkness. "He's been dead for a long time. This isn't possible. We have to get out." As he tried to explain the impossible horror to Chloe, the lights in the ambulance flickered back on. They blinked erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and shrank, making the compartment seem to breathe, to pulse with an unseen life, a malevolent heart. The sudden, harsh illumination was almost as terrifying as the absolute darkness, revealing fleeting glimpses of something moving in the periphery of their vision. And then the light went out again, plunging them back into absolute blackness. This time, a chilling cold swept through the compartment, a bone-deep chill that made their teeth chatter, a cold that seemed to suck the very warmth from their bodies, leaving them hollow and empty. It was a cold, a morgue of a crypt, a cold that seeped into their very bones, a presence that felt ancient and malevolent, pressing in on them. The body, Chloe screamed, her voice raw, frantic, a desperate wail. Her flashlight beam, now the only source of light, cut through the darkness to the gurney. The old woman's body was gone. The sheet lay crumpled on the floor, empty. The gurney was bare, the straps hanging loosely, swaying with the ambulance's impossible speed, a ghostly cradle. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized them. They scrambled for the back doors, their only escape. Marcus fumbled with the latch, his fingers numb with cold and terror. Slipping on the frozen metal, he pulled, he pushed, he kicked, but the doors wouldn't budge. They were sealed shut, as if welded from the outside, an impenetrable barrier. As they struggled, they heard faint scratching sounds from the other side, like long nails dragging across metal, growing louder, more insistent. As they struggled, the lights flickered back on, brighter this time, a blinding, harsh glare that seemed to burn their retinas, making them flinch. And there, standing directly in front of the back doors, as if she had simply materialized from the chilling cold, was the old woman. She was no longer decrepit. Her skin was smooth, unblemished, glowing with an unnatural pallor, like freshly polished marble. Her white hair flowed around her shoulders like a silken shroud, impossibly long and luminous, seeming to ripple in an unseen current. Her eyes, however, were not milky and clouded. They glowed with an eerie, phosphorescent light, a malevolent green that pierced the darkness, radiating an ancient power, a hunger that seemed to consume all light. And on her lips, a wide, impossibly serene smile, a smile that promised an eternity of suffering, a smile that stretched too wide, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous, like tiny, glistening needles. She stood perfectly still, her feet not touching the floor, as if the ambulance wasn't hurtling to the night at impossible speeds, her form solid, yet somehow ethereal, a terrifying apparition. As she smiled, the metallic scent of blood filled the air, thick and cloying. The ambulance took a sharp, violent turn, a sudden, sickening lurch that threw them off balance, slamming them against the side of the compartment. The world outside became a dizzying kaleidoscope of black and distorted light, a chaotic blur of trees and buildings, a final, terrifying landscape. The tires shrieked, a high-pitched scream of metal on asphalt, and the vehicle rolled, once, twice, 3 times, the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass filling their ears, a symphony of destruction. They were thrown against the walls, against each other, the world spinning into a chaotic vortex of pain and terror. The old woman's glowing eyes and triumphant smile, the last thing they saw before darkness consumed them, a darkness that tasted of old blood and sweet decay. At dawn, the Harmony Creek Gazette was abuzz with the story. A horrific ambulance crash on a deserted stretch of Old Mill Road, just outside the town limits. The vehicle was a mangled wreck, twisted metal and shattered glass, barely recognizable. The report spoke of 3 paramedics found dead inside, their bodies broken and contorted, their faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable horror, their eyes wide and staring. The local sheriff, a grizzled man named Miller, spoke of the unexplainable chill that permeated the wreckage, even hours after the sun rose. And the patient, an elderly woman they were transporting, was also confirmed dead at the scene. But the police found no trace of the old woman's body in the wreckage. Only the 3 paramedics and the chilling, inexplicable smile on David's face, a smile that mirrored the one Marcus had seen on the old woman just before the end. Sheriff Miller also noted a faint, unsettling scent clinging to the wreckage, a mix of old fruit and something metallic that no one could identify. The cause of the crash was listed as unknown. The case was closed, but the questions, like the silent whispers in the empty ambulance, lingered, echoing in the cold, damp air of Harmony Creek, a town that now held its breath for a different reason. When you are the only rescuer, who can rescue you? The small town of Blackwood Falls, nestled deep in the ancient, whispering Appalachians of Pennsylvania, usually slept soundly under a thick blanket of stars. Tonight, however, a preternatural silence had descended. It was heavier than any fog, muffling the usual symphony of distant crickets and the occasional hum of a passing car. This silence felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the quaint, dimly lit houses. It made the very air feel heavy and stagnant. For Ben Carter, Blackwood Falls sole night shift paramedic, it was supposed to be an off day, a rare reprieve from the grim realities of his job. He was home, nursing a lukewarm beer. The silence of his small house amplified the unsettling quiet outside. It was a quiet that hummed with an unseen tension. He hated nights like this. The stillness felt wrong, like the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the calm. He shifted on his worn couch, the springs groaning in protest, as a dull ache began in his lower abdomen. At first, he dismissed it as indigestion, a result of the late-night pizza he devoured. It had been a greasy, guilt-ridden pleasure, but the ache sharpened, twisting into a searing, relentless pain that made him gasp. He doubled over. It was a familiar pain, one he'd seen on countless faces in the back of his ambulance. Appendicitis, kidney stones. Something urgent, something that needed immediate medical attention. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth, a metallic tang that seemed to coat his tongue. It felt like a premonition. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the pain intensified, radiating outwards. It was a fiery serpent coiling in his gut, tightening its coils with every shallow breath. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with agony and a rising panic. He, of all people, knew what this could mean. He dialed the Blackwood Falls Community Hospital dispatch. The familiar number was a lifeline, a desperate prayer in the growing darkness of his living room. Blackwood Falls Community. This is Sarah. The attendant's voice, crisp and efficient, came through the line. Sarah, a kind woman who'd been on dispatch for as long as Ben had been a paramedic, knew him well. Her voice was a small comfort, a tether to the sane world. It was a fleeting illusion of safety. Sarah, it's Ben, he managed, his voice strained, barely a whisper. Each word was a struggle. I need an ambulance. Severe abdominal pain. I think it's my appendix. It's bad, Sarah. Really bad. A beat of surprised silence, longer than it should have been, stretched taut between them. Ben? Oh, my goodness. Are you sure? You sound terrible. What happened? Did you eat something funny? Never been surer, he gasped, clutching his side, his knuckles white against his pale skin. Just send it. Who's on tonight? Don't tell me it's that new kid, Jenkins. He'd probably get lost trying to find my street in this fog. He tried to inject some humor, a desperate attempt to cling to normalcy, but it came out as a choked, pained cough, quickly swallowed by the silence. Sarah chuckled, a nervous, almost forced sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Don't worry, Ben. We're sending the best of them. You just hang tight. They'll be there in 5. The line clicked dead. Ben slumped back, trying to control his ragged breathing. The pain was a hot poker in his side, twisting deeper. The best of them. He wondered who that could be. Blackwood Falls only had one ambulance, and he was usually the one driving it on nights like these. A chill, unrelated to his pain, snaked up his spine. It was a premonition of something deeply, irrevocably wrong. He glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum had stopped, frozen mid-swing. The hands were stuck at 2:17 a.m. He shivered. Minutes later, the wail began. It was distant at first, a mournful cry cutting through the oppressive silence. Then it grew steadily louder, closer. The familiar siren of his ambulance. It wasn't just a siren. It was a sound he knew intimately. The particular pitch and throb of the engine. The subtle rattle of the siren housing. Ben dragged himself to the front door, leaning against the frame, peering out into the swirling mist. It had thickened into an impenetrable shroud, obscuring everything beyond his porch light. The siren was deafening now, right outside his house. It vibrated through the very foundations of his home, rattling the window panes. It made the very air tremble. But no headlights cut through the fog. No flashing lights painted his porch red and blue. And no one was knocking. He waited, gritting his teeth against a fresh wave of pain. This wave felt colder, sharper than before, as if the pain itself was a living, icy thing. The siren continued its banshee shriek. It was a relentless, piercing sound that seemed to bore into his skull. A sound that was somehow both deafening and utterly silent, existing only within the confines of his own mind. Why wasn't anyone knocking? Why wasn't he hearing footsteps on his porch? A cold dread began to replace the pain in his gut. It was a creeping, existential terror that clawed at his throat. He felt a profound sense of isolation, as if the entire town had vanished, leaving only him and this screaming machine. It was a monstrous sentinel in the fog. He pushed open the door, stepping out onto the porch. The fog was so thick, he could barely see his hand in front of his face. But the ambulance was there, a dark, hulking silhouette. Its siren screamed into the night, a silent scream that tore his sanity. It sat perfectly still, directly in front of his driveway. Its tires were barely visible in the swirling mist, looking like a forgotten toy. The driver's side door was open, a black rectangle against the vehicle's side. It was a gaping maw, an invitation. The back doors, too, stood ajar, invitingly wide, like arms outstretched. But there was no one. No driver slumped over the wheel. No paramedic waiting by the open back. The siren wailed, a disembodied cry from an empty machine. It was a sound that seemed to emanate from the very fog itself, from the heart of the night. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unnatural quiet that somehow permeated the siren's shriek. He took a hesitant step off the porch. The damp grass was cold beneath his bare feet, clinging to his skin like icy fingers, pulling him forward. "Hello," he called out. His voice was swallowed by the fog and the siren, thin and reedy. It was a desperate plea. "Is anyone there? Sarah? Jenkins?" Only the siren answered. It was a mocking, endless scream that seemed to vibrate directly inside his head, a sound that was now undeniably inside him. He moved closer. His every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, to flee this impossible scene, to escape the creeping madness. But the pain in his abdomen was a relentless fire, demanding attention, demanding help. It was a desperate, primal need overriding his terror, pulling him toward the vehicle like a moth to a deadly flame. He peered into the driver's cabin. Empty. The steering wheel was perfectly centered. The keys dangled from the ignition, swaying almost imperceptibly, as if an invisible hand had just released them. He walked around to the back, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist, revealing nothing but the swirling vapor. The back compartment, usually cluttered with medical equipment, was eerily clean, stripped bare. No gurney, no bags, no familiar tools of his trade. Just a sterile, empty space. It was a blank canvas for whatever was to come, a hollow chamber waiting for its occupant. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air within the ambulance, like heat haze. But it was freezing cold. Hesitating, his mind racing, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin, he stepped inside. The air in the ambulance was colder than the outside fog. It was a bone-deep chill that seeped into his very marrow, making him shiver uncontrollably. His teeth chattered. It smelled faintly of antiseptic, but also something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood and formaldehyde. The scent made his stomach churn. It was a taste of iron and corruption filling his mouth. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just the usual ambulance smell, amplified by his fear and pain. But the rationalizations felt thin, transparent. He reached for the interior light switch, his fingers brushing against cold, smooth plastic, feeling a faint, static charge that made his arm hair stand on end. Then, with a soft click that echoed unnaturally loud in the silence, the back door slammed shut behind him. The sound was deafening, final like a tomb ceiling. It cut him off from the world, from hope. Before he could react, the interior lights flickered once, a brief, blinding flash that seared his retinas. Then they plunged him into absolute darkness. The siren, which had been wailing, abruptly cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was even more terrifying than its noise. It was a silence that pressed on him, suffocating, stealing his breath. The ambulance lurched forward. Ben, caught off guard, stumbled and fell to the floor. His head hit the hard rubber with a sickening thud. The vehicle began to accelerate, rapidly, impossibly fast. The engine's hum grew into a monstrous roar. It vibrated through the floorboards, through his very bones. It was a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth, from the very core of his fear. He scrambled to get up, his vision swimming. The pain in his abdomen flared with every jolt. It was a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm him, to consume his consciousness. He raised his head, blinking into the oppressive blackness. His breath was ragged. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. And then he saw them, 5 figures. They materialized from the deepest shadows of the ambulance, indistinct at first, then solidifying into grotesque, decaying forms. They shimmered with an unholy light. They were standing around him, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their eyes, even in the darkness, seemed to glow with a faint, malevolent light, like embers in a dying fire. They reflected his own terror. The air grew impossibly cold. The temperature plummeted, a frigid embrace. The metallic, sweet smell intensified, making him gag. It was a taste of iron and corruption filling his mouth, coating his tongue. The ambulance kept speeding, a phantom vehicle hurtling through a void. The roar of its engine was the only sound. It was a relentless, terrifying drone. Ben's breath hitched in his throat. A terrified gasp. He knew them. He knew every single one of them. Their faces, though distorted by decay, were etched forever in his memory. They were burned into his mind by guilt and fear. There was Mrs. Henderson. Her face was a pale, papery mask. Her eyes were sunken, but with that same faint, accusing glow. Her spectral hand, thin and translucent, pointed a bony finger at him. The nail was impossibly long and sharp. She was the first. He remembered her heart attack. He had deliberately delayed resuscitation, just long enough for her to slip away. Her last desperate gasps echoed in his ears as he watched the monitor flatline. It was a silent lie. He could still feel the coldness of her hand as he pretended to check for a pulse, knowing it was already gone. Next to her stood young Billy Jenkins, no older than 10. His small, emaciated form shivered. A gaping, silent scream was on his lips where his mouth should be. It was a black void. Billy had been hit by a car, his spleen ruptured. A simple surgery would have saved him, but Ben had seen the opportunity. The perfect, tragic accident. He had ensured the bleeding continued, slowly, agonizingly. He told the frantic parents that sometimes there's just nothing you can do. He could still hear the boy's faint whimpers, even now. Then came Mr. Abernathy, a burly construction worker. His spectral chest still bore the faint, ghostly outline of the rebar that had impaled him. It was a dark stain against his translucent form. Ben had ensured that rebar stayed put, bleeding him out slowly. He dismissed his pleas for help as delirium, muttering about irreversible trauma to the police. He remembered the man's powerful grip weakening, his eyes pleading, before they glazed over. Beside him, a young mother, Sarah Miller. Her spectral arm still cradled a phantom infant. Its form was barely visible, a shimmering outline of profound loss. Her eyes burned with a silent, agonizing grief, a grief that seemed to consume the very air around her, making it heavy with despair. She had died of internal bleeding after a minor car accident. It was a death easily preventable. But Ben had been too focused on a healthy infant, a perfect specimen for his contact. He'd let her bleed out in the back of the ambulance, whispering false reassurances. And finally, old man Tiber, a hermit from the woods. His face was a patchwork of necrotic tissue. His spectral hand still clutched the rusted axe handle that had ended his life. It was a wound Ben had assured the police was self-inflicted, a tragic accident in the wilderness. Ben had found him still alive, barely, but with organs that were surprisingly healthy for his age. They were all here, the ones he had let die, the ones he had helped die, the ones whose organs he had meticulously harvested, ensuring they were fresh for his black market contact. A discreet doctor in a neighboring state who paid handsomely for the donations. He'd built a small fortune on their suffering, on their stolen lives. The ambulance took another sharp, violent turn, throwing Ben against Billy's spectral form. He recoiled. A scream caught in his throat. The boy's skin felt like ice. Ben heard a faint, childish giggle, devoid of joy. It was a sound that burrowed into his brain, echoing the laughter of demons. "We know, Ben," Mrs. Henderson rasped. Her voice was a dry whisper, like sandpaper rubbing against bone, yet filled the entire ambulance. It vibrated through his very being. "We know what you did, every single one of us. We saw it all, every cut, every lie." Her words echoed, amplified by the others. It was a chorus of condemnation, each voice layered on top of the last, building into a deafening roar. The harvest, Billy's voice, a thin, reedy sound, joined in. It was a chilling echo of his own thoughts, a horrifying confirmation. "For the harvest, you took us to the harvest. You cut us open." "The organs, Ben," Mr. Abernathy's voice boomed, chillingly clear. It resonated through the very metal of the ambulance, making it hum with dark energy. "The ones you sold. Our parts. You sold our parts. Our lives. For your greed. For your comfort." The accusations rained down on him. Each word was a hammer blow to his soul, shattering his carefully constructed facade of normalcy. He was not a good man doing a tough job. The despair that had been a dull ache now became a crushing weight, pressing him down, suffocating him, stealing his breath. He had thought himself clever, untraceable. Who would suspect the town's only paramedic? He'd chosen his victims carefully, those with no family, no one to ask too many questions. He'd made sure their deaths looked like unavoidable tragedies or complications. He'd even had a contact in a black market organ ring, a discreet doctor who paid handsomely. He'd justified it to himself, a twisted form of survival, a way to escape the crushing debt and boredom of small-town life. It was a necessary evil, he'd told himself. No, you're wrong," Ben screamed, scrambling backwards, trying to press himself into the non-existent wall. His body racked with tremors. His muscles screamed. The pain in his abdomen was forgotten, replaced by a terror so profound it threatened to shatter his mind. It would tear his sanity to shreds, reducing him to a gibbering wreck. "You were dying. There was nothing I could do. I tried. I swear I tried. It was an accident. All of it." The apparitions moved closer. Their forms flickered, becoming more solid, more terrifying. Their decaying flesh seemed to ripple, to shift. Mrs. Henderson's face contorted. Her ghostly smile stretched wider, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, like a shark's. They glistened in the faint, malevolent light. Billy's eyes, those innocent dead eyes, began to glow with the same malevolent green light he'd seen in the old woman's eyes in Harmony Creek General. It was a light that seemed to burn into his very soul, searing him from the inside out. Sarah Miller's spectral arms reached out, not to comfort, but to grasp. Her fingers phased through his skin, leaving an icy burn. It was a sensation of freezing fire that spread through his veins, consuming him. "We had a chance, Ben," Sarah whispered. Her voice was a mournful dirge, filled with an ancient sorrow that echoed through the ambulance. "You took it. You took our chance. You took our future. And now we take yours, piece by piece." The ambulance swerved again violently, throwing Ben to floor. The ghostly figures loomed over him. Their decaying faces were inches from his. Their eyes burned with cold, vengeful fury. Their whispers grew into an unbearable cacophony. It was a chorus of agony and accusation. Each voice recounted the moment he chose their death over their life. Each detail was excruciatingly clear, replayed in his mind. It was a horrifying montage of his sins. He saw the flash of the scalpel, the cold calculation in his own eyes, the quiet satisfaction of a job done, a profit made. The blood money stained his hands, poisoning his soul. "No, please," he begged. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and the cold sweat of fear. He clawed at the floor, desperate to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The ambulance was a sealed coffin, hurtling through an endless night. It was a tomb on wheels. Its destination was unknown, its purpose terrifyingly clear. The figures leaned in. Their faces were inches from his. The metallic scent of blood was overwhelming, filling his lungs, choking him. He could feel their cold breath on his skin. He heard the faint, wet sound of their decaying lungs. It was a grotesque symphony of death, a final, chilling lullaby. "Now!" Mr. Abernathy's voice boomed, chillingly clear. It resonated through the very metal of the ambulance, making it vibrate with dark energy. "It's your turn for the ride, Ben. The last ride. And this time, there's no one to save you. No one to hear you scream. Only us." The ambulance took a final, sharp, violent turn. It was a sudden, sickening lurch that threw him against the spectral forms of his victims. Their cold, decaying flesh pressed against him, suffocating him, absorbing him. The world outside became a dizzying kaleidoscope of black and distorted light. It was a chaotic blur of trees and buildings, a final, terrifying landscape spinning into oblivion. The tires shrieked, a high-pitched scream of metal on asphalt. The vehicle rolled once, twice, 3 times. The sound of tearing metal and shattering glass filled his ears. It was a symphony of destruction, a crescendo of his own demise. He was thrown against the walls, against the spectral forms of his victims. Their glowing eyes and triumphant, stretched smiles were the last thing he saw before darkness consumed him. It was a darkness that tasted of old blood and sweet decay, a darkness from which there would be no return, only the endless ride. At dawn, the Blackwood Falls Gazette was abuzz with a strange, unsettling story. The town's only ambulance had vanished. It was last seen heading out of town on Old Mill Road, responding to a call for Ben Carter, the lone night shift paramedic, who had reported severe abdominal pain. Neither Ben nor the ambulance were ever found. The local sheriff, a grizzled man named Miller, spoke of the unexplainable chill that permeated Old Mill Road that night. He also mentioned the faint, unsettling scent of old fruit and something metallic that lingered in the air. It was a scent that seemed to cling to the very trees, refusing to dissipate. Search parties scoured the woods for weeks, but found no wreckage, no tire tracks leading off the road, no sign of the vehicle or its occupant. The case was closed, listed as a disappearance. But in Blackwood Falls, whispers began to spread. Whispers of a different kind of harvest, and of the ambulance that still drove the back roads on moonless nights, its siren a silent scream, carrying its haunted cargo into the endless night, forever seeking its next passenger, forever collecting its due.